I did my top 10 Sega Saturn games, I had to leave out a bunch of stuff that I really wanted to include. These were games I enjoyed immensely, and honestly, every one of them could have easily been in the top 10 themselves. So much so, I almost did an entire 10-minute segment of honorable mentions just for them. Typically, I never go beyond the top 10 in my other videos, and I don't plan on changing that. But since the Saturn is my favorite console ever, we are going to take a look at the next batch of games I consider to be the best on the platform. That's right, that top 10 we started with is now going to be a top 25. For those of you that missed my Saturn top 10, I'll throw a link in the description if you want to watch it. And since we have so many games to go over, this one is going to go kind of fast, so let's get started. I feel that The Legend of Oasis is such an underappreciated gem on the Saturn. If you've never played it before, it was developed by Ancient, who also did Beyond Oasis for the Sega Genesis. The story here is directly connected to that game, and they both are action-adventures similar in design to stuff like The Legend of Zelda. Explore dungeons, find items, talk to NPCs, you know the drill. This one had a great art style, and the music was done by Yuzo Koshiro, the mastermind behind Streets of Rage. It opens up a bit slow, but really takes on a great pace and tone a few hours in. If you have never given it a chance, please do. The Saturn did not see many games of this type in the West. For you PAL Saturn fans, it was known as the Story of Thor 2. The Saturn had a handful of really great light gun games. The first Virtua Cop was good, but part 2 here was a must-buy. Everything was spiffed up. There's car chases, shootouts on trains, helicopters flying around, and a whole army of bad guys to shoot. As with most incredible gun games, this one can be played with a friend and is 100% better for it. If you find yourself stuck without a light gun or you play on a modern LCD television, this also supports the shuttle mouse and the 3D analog pad for smoother gameplay. It was among the last few games Sega AM2 developed internally for the Saturn and is one of the machine's most impressive 3D games. Bomberman has been on everything at one point in time or another. The gameplay has always been great with your friends and family, and the Saturn version kicks it up a notch with 10-player support. The Japanese version used X-Band for online play, and the US version used the Netlink. There was even a special Bomberman controller and multi-tap produced for it. Most of you know the gameplay here pretty well. It has a bunch of different modes ranging from team-based to free-for-all matches. The graphics didn't do much to go beyond the titles before it, but it certainly isn't a bad-looking game at all. If you want something to play with your wife and kids, you really can't beat it. I enjoyed a great many shoot-'em-ups on the Saturn. The library is loaded with them after all. But Layer Section was an early game that I feel really set a standard for arcade-to-home conversions. It's based on the Taito F3 game Ray Force and features lock-on style action where you can attack stuff in both the foreground and the background. You get loads of sprites on the screen, virtually no slowdown at all, and man do those parallax effects get me all warm and fuzzy inside. It's got a great soundtrack and 2-player simultaneous co-op. Best part is that the Japanese version here is still fairly affordable at under $50 typically. Acclaim would publish it in the West under the name Galactic Attack. It also has a sequel on the Saturn called Layer Section 2, but but I consider this one to be the superior. Dragon Force is one of my favorite games of all time. I really enjoyed the sequel here as well. This one changes up things quite a bit, including the ability to mix unit types and challenge caves to test your skill. You still get the 100 versus 100 battles, and the story is directly connected to the previous events in Part 1. The only thing I really didn't like is that it's a bit more linear than the original, and I didn't find the characters nearly as likable. Otherwise, it's a great strategy game, and now that it has an English translation, many more of you can play it. Dark Savior is one of the more unique games on the Saturn. It's actually a mix of a few different genres. It's a bit of an isometric platformer, a fighting game, and it's sprinkled with touches of RPG and adventure elements. The story here revolves around the parallel system, which changes the way everything unfolds based on how you play it in the beginning. This creates almost mandatory replay value to see how each segment plays out. It's not the best looking game on the Saturn, and the gameplay can be off-putting at first thanks to some difficulty jumping, but there is a deep and very playable game here otherwise. It was done by Climax, who had also done Landstalker for the Sega Genesis. It's quirky and different, and was perfectly at home on Sega Saturn. Sometimes a game on the Saturn just fit my preferences and personality to a T. Astal was a 2D platformer starring an adorable little character that has made some bad decisions that has landed him in some hot water. While being punished, the evil Geist steals his girl, and Astalu must save the day. What we have here is a pure redemption story in 2D form. Astal battles his way across the different landscapes with only his resolve and his bird buddy that accompanies him. Gameplay here is super simple. You run, jump, smash, and throw the bad guys until you get to a boss. While that may seem overly simple, Astal's appeal is really its style. Visually, it's one of the most potent examples of the Saturn's two-dimensional power. Beautiful backgrounds, large sprites, and loads of colors and special effects are all around you. Frankly, there isn't anything remotely close to it in the genre in regards to its art design and appeal. Some will say the gameplay is too simple, while I say it's just strong enough to allow you to really soak up the visual extravaganza that it is without distractions. As a troubled teen myself, I had a connection with Astal and his attempt to make things right. This one is special, and it's a damn shame Sega never released it in Europe. Cotton 2 wasn't your typical shoot 'em up. It was slower and used a grappling system that allowed you to grab enemies and use them as shields and weapons. The presentation was bold as well. Large sprites set against otherworldly backdrops really set a tone of magic and fantasy that set it apart from your typical space shooter. It was challenging as well. It took multiple sessions just to get past the first half of the game, and only the most dedicated will ever see the final act. Putting a bow on this awesome package is the music, which like the first has a great whimsical feel to it. This appeared first on an STV Titan arcade game, and when it came home, it used the extended RAM cartridge for additional voice samples. A remixed version of it was released soon after, called Cotton Boomerang. It added additional characters, modified the scoring system, and added a bunch of changes to the graphics and sound. Both are incredibly fun and well worth your time. Game Arts was known for a great many properties back then, chief among them the excellent titles like Grandia and the Lunar games. But they also created a fantastic set of mech-based action games called Gungriffon. You pilot your mobile metal behemoth across many different landscapes, fighting tanks, aircraft, and other mecha that can do just as much damage as you can. Along with your weapons, you have cool options like night vision to employ while you're in the field. The 3D graphics engine was really impressive on the Saturn. It ran smooth and the models looked great. It uses the MPEG movie card for improved cinematics if you got it, and there was a sequel that carries over much of what made it great. The Saturn had a handful of solid games based on mecha, but Gungriffon here was the best. Love it or hate it, the Street Fighter Alpha series were the go-to fighters on the Saturn. All three were stellar ports of the arcade versions, and the upgraded Alpha 2 Gold here was one of the best. Called 02 Dash in Japan, it takes an already fantastic fighter and adds Kami and the unbelievably hard Akuma mode, where you must battle a jacked up Shin Akuma. You will not find a fighting game on this system that looks or plays as well as this that doesn't use the extended RAM cartridge. That's right, this is the bare bones Saturn in all its glory, proving that it could do just fine on its own. In Japan, the value line known as Satakore got a 02 Dash as a separate release, but before that you had to get it in a compilation called Street Fighter Collection, which also included the Super and Super Turbo games. It stands tall on a platform that was absolutely chock full of great fighting games, giving us superior graphics, sound, and gameplay that really set it apart. Part 3 was better, but this one is still well worth owning. Magic Knight Rayearth was an action-adventure based on the popular anime. It was developed internally at Sega and released early in the platform's life in Japan. The land of Sephiroth falls under attack, and it's up to our three heroines to rescue Princess Emerald and save the day. This one doesn't use the random battles of your typical JRPG, and instead opts for real-time combat that allows you to switch characters with their own unique attacks on the fly. It's a nice change of pace from similar games on the Saturn, and kinda feels like Sega's take on Zelda. This is backed up by a great audio-visual presentation that is colorful, well-animated, and sounds like a dream. While this was launched originally in Japan in the summer of 1995, the US version didn't see the light of day until the very end of 1998, its final official release. It's rare and super expensive these days, but well worth the energy to find a way to play it. Graphic adventure titles typically aren't my thing, so I want to impress upon you just how great one of these types of games have to be to keep my attention. Konami's Policenauts is one such title. Like Snatcher before it, it was the type of release that didn't treat you like a child. While it certainly had its fantastical details, the story felt serious and carried with it the weight of real characters that had something to gain or lose as it unfolded. The hand-drawn art is on another level, and the animation puts most games to shame. I had wanted to play through this at the time so badly, as I had been a fan of Kojima's work, but it was locked to Japan for years. Thankfully, it was translated by fans into English, and all those involved have my eternal gratitude. This is the definitive version of Policenauts. Not only do you get additional features, multiple endings, and new art, you also get shuttle mouse and Virtua gun support. If you haven't played it, you are missing one hell of a good experience. Most of the time, it's easy for me to explain to you why I enjoy a certain video game, but with Sega's Nights into Dreams, it's a bit more difficult. I can tell you that I enjoyed the gameplay and thought the art style was nice, but it's more than that. There's a brilliant sense of freedom to its gameplay, almost an antithesis to Consequence. I mean, it gives you this story about little kids helping knights save the land of Nightopia, but honestly, the gameplay never feels like it's connected to that in the slightest. You fly around collecting orbs the entire way, and the narrative takes a backseat. There's a score attack system in place that people seem to love, but I never gave two shits about any of that. I just love to fly around and play it to see the next stage. So what makes Nights into Dreams so special? I honestly have no clue. All I can tell you is, you need to play it to discover the answer for yourselves. The first Panzer Dragoon was a great game. I loved the music, the world, the gameplay. I mean, for such a simple concept as a shooter, it certainly did a great many things right. When Panzer II released, it improved the visuals, added dragons that could evolve, and even had some ground-based combat. The gameplay here was just as fantastic as well. It still has 360-degree shoot-'em-up action, massive boss battles, and even adds a desperation attack that levels enemies with a massive blast of lasers. It's among the best-looking games for the platform, and even manages to run more smoothly than the first. The only thing that held it back from showing up in the top 10 is my disinterest in the story and my preference for the first soundtrack. Outside of that, this is a killer game and every bit as classic as the original. Virtua Fighter 2 was released at a very special time for Saturn fans. After the dreadful launch of the platform in the United States, things were looking pretty bad. It was clear it did not have the impact Sega was hoping for, and its future was casting a hell of a lot of doubt in the hearts and minds of those that had purchased it. All that seemed like a distant memory when Virtua Fighter 2 released, however. It appeared like Sega was finally changing the narrative of its new platform and turning things around. It looks so much better than the stuff released just months before, running in the Saturn's high-res mode and sporting a frame rate that was truly impressive. It was even backed up by Virtua Cop and Sega Rally around the same time period, and it never felt more promising to be a Saturn owner. Sega had really made an effort to show that their 32-bit machine had the ability to do these games, and everything was gonna be okay. I still love the way this game looks and plays, and often fire it up just to listen to its great soundtrack in the watch mode. In fact, as I edit this very video, my Saturn runs it for inspiration. Whether it's a top 10, top 25, or even a top 100, the placement of these games often becomes the focus instead of the fact that we all agree these titles were worth being on a list like this in the first place. Whether your favorites were placed at number 25 or number 1, the fact that they made enough impact on us to earn a spot is all that really matters. The Saturn may have been a massive failure for Sega financially, but it certainly isn't lacking memorable software. That's actually something that defines pretty much every Sega platform out there for me. They never won a single generation in regards to worldwide sales, but every one of their platforms sit prominently in my memory, as do their games. And that's really what's important. Corporations come and go, developers fade away, but it's the legacies that impact us the most. Those that didn't own or support a Saturn during its lifetime like to quote websites, talk about sales numbers, and generalize the overall problems that Sega had as a company when they talk about it. But in the end, they will never know the joy of playing Panzer Dragoon in 1995, the absolute feeling of jubilation at seeing Virtua Fighter II running later that year, or the appreciation of slamming the 4MB extended RAM cartridge in a machine for the first time and seeing X-Men vs. Street Fighter in all its arcade glory. You had to have been there and been a part of that to understand what the hell you're talking about and why so many of us loved it dearly. And for all the mistakes, all the bad choices, all the failures, Sega is intricately tied to some of the happiest times in my life. And that, my friends, is what legacy is all about. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.